The pipes hissed just before the screaming started. Somewhere in the occupied East, 30 British women stood barefoot on slick stone, their backs hunched against the cold. They had been marched into the tiled chamber one by one, stripped of uniform, rank, and identity, their dog tags confiscated, their hair tied back by string. The air in the room reeked of rust, damp concrete, and something else. Fear, thick and silent like fog. A soldier at the doorway barked instructions in a clipped dialect, "You will wash." Then clothing. The words came through a translator, but the meaning felt irrelevant. Every woman in the room heard only one thing. This was how it ended. Nurse Iris Hamilton clenched her fingers around the edge of her thin underdress. Her breath stuttered, shallow, a heartbeat too fast. She had listened to fear before, under bombardment in Singapore, while lifting the wounded into lorries. Yet this terror was stiller, colder, waiting for permission to strike. "This is how they do it," someone whispered. "This is what they call cleansing." "No one comes back from the showers," came the response. They had heard rumors before capture, whispers from other prisoners, stories of women driven into rooms like this, pipes above their heads, promises of cleaning before death. In those stories, no water ever flowed. Only silence, then poison, then the end. The pipes groaned, muscles tensed, lips tightened. One woman clutched a prayer card, another mouthed the name of a husband she would never see again. The air thickened, waiting. Water burst from the nozzles overhead, cold, harsh, real. Relief was not gentle, it was explosive. Screams broke apart into sobs. Some women laughed outright, wild and brittle. Others pressed against the walls, covering their heads, convinced the reprieve was temporary. Hamilton stumbled backward, water streaming over her face, her lungs unable to decide between tears and air. "It is water," she gasped. "Only water." Near the center of the room, a woman dropped to her knees. She pressed both palms to the floor, letting the spray hit her neck and back like something holy. Another touched the pouring stream as if expecting the water to turn mid-fall into gas. A guard at the door stared, bewildered. He saw panic where he expected obedience. The translator stepped closer, his tired eyes softening as understanding formed. "They thought it was gas," he said quietly. The guard glanced toward the ceiling, then back at the prisoners. His jaw worked, but he spoke nothing. Lieutenant Davies, the oldest among them, walked stiffly to the bench where a bar of soap waited. She lifted it with a trembling hand and stared at it as if unsure it was real. Then she smelled it, a faint floral scent, a reminder of a world that still might contain gentleness. Her face collapsed, and she began to cry with soundless, shaking breaths. That night she wrote in her small notebook, "I cried today because death did not come. I cried because water touched my skin without pain. I cried because the soap was white and smelled of life. I do not know how to survive relief." For all of them, the fear had not vanished. It had simply changed shape. Their journey to this place had begun in chaos. Singapore had fallen in flames, hospitals overrun, nurses captured while still holding bandages or syringes, dragged away from the groans of patients they could not save. Malta had endured constant bombardment. Clerks and signal operators were taken as positions collapsed around them. Those captured had been shown no comfort, only the hard certainty of defeat. Transport had been silent. Crates of soldiers, freezing train compartments, days without sunlight. They believed each stop might be their last. The guards who escorted them neither taunted nor comforted. That silence felt worse than cruelty. It felt like anticipation. When the train doors finally opened, the compound seemed carved from the same bleak earth that surrounded it, barbed wire, watchtowers, boots always in motion. It was not a labor camp. It was not a hospital. It was something in between, a place that felt temporary and permanent all at once. The shower was the first moment in which expectation shattered against reality. No torture, no execution, just water and a new uniform. Their names were not used, only numbers, their ranks forgotten. Yet no one struck them. No one spat. They were handed mugs of broth and slices of bread. Hunger battled suspicion. Hunger won. After the meal, they sat quietly in their assigned barracks, bunks pushed close together beneath narrow windows. Hamilton stared at her hands. They did not look like hers, pale from lack of light, clean for the first time in weeks. "Why are they feeding us?" she whispered. Davies, who still held the bar of soap wrapped tightly in a cloth, looked back with tired eyes. "Because we are not dead." "But why aren't we?" Hamilton persisted. Davies lifted the soap. "This terrifies me more than anything else they have done," she answered. Hamilton swallowed hard. The older woman was right. It would have been easier to accept cruelty. Cruelty fit the shape of war. Compassion did not. They were unprepared for survival. The fear that had gripped them since capture did not disappear. It crouched behind every act of care, every ration, every quiet command. A new terror was forming, one that dissolved certainty like steam. What if the enemy was not who they had been taught to fear? What if kindness existed on the wrong side of the wire? The water that had washed away the dirt clinging to their bodies had also washed away something even more dangerous. The story they believed about the enemy had begun to unravel. They could not admit it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever aloud, but relief had cracked them open. Inside the barracks that night, sleep did not come easily. Tears did, and thoughts too heavy to name. They had arrived expecting to die. Instead, they were clean. They did not know which was harder to endure. The women lay still in the darkness, the scent of soap faint in the air, and wondered whether hope was the cruelest weapon of all. The clatter of metal trays marked the start of every morning. In the low, grey light of dawn, the women stirred to the sound of boots on gravel and buckets of boiling water dragged across stone. They rose slowly, cautiously, limbs still sore from weeks of transport and uncertainty. The bunks creaked with every movement, a kind of quiet chorus of survival. Their new uniforms itched. Woolen, coarse, stamped with initials they'd never asked for. KGF for Kriegsgefangene, prisoner of war. They weren't names, but they weren't numbers either. The mess hall was a squat stone building with wooden benches and long tables. The first time they entered, their eyes scanned every corner for signs of cruelty. Instead, they found bowls of soup, thick, salty, filled with lentils and bits of carrot. Alongside it, a small loaf of hard bread, a chipped mug of bitter coffee. Nothing grand, nothing poisoned, just food. They stared. No one moved at first. Then Davies took a spoonful and said nothing. Just chewed slowly, swallowed, and took another. Iris Hamilton followed. She lifted the spoon to her lips and tasted what she hadn't known she missed: warmth. The moment it hit her stomach, tears sprang to her eyes. A woman at the far end of the table laughed once, short and sharp. Another began to cry into her bread. Someone whispered, "It's real." They ate in silence after that, not out of fear, but reverence. After meals came work. Labor was structured and relentless. The camp commandant, an aging officer with an unreadable expression, insisted on order. Every woman was assigned a task: laundry, latrines, field maintenance, sewing uniforms, collecting firewood. They worked in pairs, closely watched but never struck. Hamilton was sent to the camp infirmary, a small building that smelled faintly of iodine and coal. She helped inventory gauze, wash surgical instruments and boil water. Once, she caught a glimpse of a wounded Axis soldier, barely older than 20, his leg bandaged, his face pale with fever. The doctor, a quiet man with a stiff back and round spectacles, checked the boy's vitals without comment. Later that afternoon, when Hamilton refilled the basins, the doctor passed her a fresh roll of bandage. "For the nurse in Barrack C," he said in crisp English. "She has a burn on her hand." Hamilton hesitated. "You care if she heals?" The doctor paused. "It is my job. War or not." That night, she sat in her bunk staring at her hands again, not because they were clean, but because they had been allowed to heal. The camp had no luxuries, no warmth, no sympathy, but it had soap, it had rules, and somewhere within those rules there was restraint. One morning, a guard noticed a prisoner struggling to carry a bucket of washing water. He stepped forward, took the handle, and carried it alongside her. He said nothing. She said nothing. But afterward, she sat down and wept. Not because he had helped, because he hadn't mocked her for needing help. For Davies, dignity came in smaller moments. A Red Cross parcel arrived mid-week. Hard candy, dried milk, newspapers. She asked for a pencil and paper. After 3 refusals, the translator returned with a writing form. "You may write to England," he said. "Censor will check." She didn't care. She just wrote, "I am alive. I am fed. I was not hurt. They do not know our names, but they see our faces." Other women began to talk more, hesitantly. Some taught each other how to say phrases in German, Czech, or Russian. A few practiced simple stretches each morning. It wasn't recovery, but it wasn't collapse either. The hardest part was when the mail cart arrived. A rusted trolley, pushed by a young soldier with freckles, rattled across the gravel. Names were read aloud, slowly, with poor pronunciation. Some women received nothing. Others opened envelopes with shaking hands, as though they might explode. Hamilton received her first letter in late autumn. It was from her sister in Cornwall, written weeks earlier. The ink smudged, the words careful. "We think of you daily. The radio said Singapore fell. We pray that someone kept you safe." She read the letter 3 times, then once more aloud. Davies touched her wrist. "They're praying," she said. Hamilton nodded. "And I don't know how to tell them." Someone answered. They never used the word good. Nothing about the camp was good. The beds were hard. The guards were stern. The food was just enough. The work was long. But something had shifted. They stopped bracing for violence and started bracing for what came after. One afternoon, while collecting laundry near the wash basin, Hamilton found a folded handkerchief tucked beneath a pile of damp cloth. A clean bar of soap wrapped inside it. She looked around. No one nearby. No note. She held it in her palm. Her breath caught. Later, she didn't mention it to anyone. She simply placed it on the small shelf near her bunk, beside the mug, beside the pencil stub she had saved. Not as evidence, as memory. They were still prisoners, but now the walls that held them back did not always feel like weapons. Sometimes they felt like silence that had not yet chosen its side. One evening, as the sky burned orange above the compound, a harmonica played from somewhere near the guardhouse, a soft, lonesome tune. Several of the women paused what they were doing and just listened. Hamilton leaned against the barrack doorframe, arms folded. For a moment, she didn't feel hunted, just tired. Davies joined her. "You ever think it's worse this way?" she asked. "How?" Davies gestured to the music. "Because now, We'll have to remember them as people." Hamilton said nothing, but she didn't look away. That night, no one spoke of gas, or death, or war. They spoke of the letter that mentioned a garden still blooming in Kent, of the doctor who handed out fresh gauze, of the guard who hummed while tapping the fence post with his boot, and of a new, quiet fear that they carried without saying. What if the world that came for them could not accept the truth they had seen? What if kindness in the wrong uniform was the one thing no one would believe? Hamilton wrote in her journal that evening, "We do not trust. Not yet, but we are no longer afraid of breathing." And in that small, uncertain sentence, the war inside them changed direction. They had not been freed, but something inside them had begun to walk. The sky above the compound was pale and still the morning they heard the news. A guard removed his cap. The others followed, one by one, until even the youngest among them stood with heads bowed, not in mourning, but in recognition. Word had spread quietly through the ranks, passed from tongue to ear in restrained voices. Berlin had fallen. Germany had surrendered. The war at last was over. The women did not cheer. They didn't clap or dance or cry. They stood in silence, the way people do when they aren't sure if something ending means they've survived it. Iris Hamilton felt the weight of her breath sitting heavy in her chest. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, each louder than the last. Banners, songs, open gates. Instead, it came like a whisper carried on wind through barbed wire. Captain Meisner, the senior officer of the camp, addressed them directly for the first time. Through a translator, he spoke with a voice that was firm but not unkind. "Your country has declared victory," he said. "Your captivity ends soon. We will arrange transport." He looked at the crowd, at their grey uniforms, their hollow faces, their cautious, expectant eyes. "You are free now," he added. Hamilton didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Free, the word no longer meant what it used to. That evening, the guards passed out envelopes and paper. Those who had families left to write to wrote. Others simply stared at the page. A few returned theirs blank. The Red Cross arrived the next day with crates of fresh soap, bandages, chocolate, and cloth. One young soldier brought a box of pins, small enamel badges of Allied flags. He said nothing, just offered them, hand extended, like a peace offering no one had asked for. When it came time to leave, the women were given wool coats, clean boots, and travel satchels. Some packed away the soap. Others hid the pencils or prayer cards they'd used to survive the long nights. Davies tucked the handkerchief around her soap and folded it gently into her coat pocket. At the transport trucks, Captain Meisner stood with several officers and bowed his head slightly as they passed. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Davies paused beside him. "You gave us water," she said in stiff German. "Not death." He didn't respond, just nodded once and stepped aside. The trucks rumbled through the gates. No cheers, no flags, just gravel and dust and silence. The road to repatriation was long. When they arrived at the coast, British officers greeted them with relief and confusion. They were questioned, inspected, cleared. They received new clothes, skirts and blouses, coats with brass buttons, hats that fit too tightly. They looked like women again. But none of them felt like they had returned. London was grey and skeletal. Bombed buildings still groaned under scaffolding. Streets where families once lived had become corridors of rubble. Newsprint headlines spoke of triumph and treaties, but few knew what to say to women who had spent years in the care of their enemy. Hamilton's sister met her at the station. They hugged hard and fast, then pulled apart just as quickly. "They didn't hurt you?" her sister asked. "No," Hamilton said. "They didn't do things to you?" Hamilton shook her head. Her sister blinked. "Then you were lucky." Hamilton smiled, but not kindly. "No," she said, "I was changed." In the weeks that followed, many of the women found work. Some returned to hospitals, others married, had children, tried to erase the war from their wardrobes and their memories. But there were reminders everywhere. The soap that smelled too familiar, the sound of boots on pavement, the rusted pipes in public baths. One night, Hamilton caught herself turning the tap with hesitation. She laughed at herself. Then she sat on the edge of the tub and cried. Davies retired to a cottage in Sussex. She never remarried. She kept a small tin box near her bedside. Inside it, a bar of soap, a handkerchief, and the slip of paper from her first Red Cross letter. On her 80th birthday, her niece asked her, "Why do you keep a bar of soap?" Davies answered, "Because one day I thought it would kill me." And it didn't. In 1961, a reunion was held quietly in London. 17 former POWs met in a hall behind a church. They brought black and white photos of the barracks, faded letters, and badges they'd hidden in coat linings. One brought a harmonica, another brought a cake. They spoke of the day the water fell, of the way laughter and sobs had mingled in the steam, of the guards who never touched them, of the soap that smelled like survival. By the end of the evening, someone began to hum. Others joined in. It wasn't a hymn. It wasn't an anthem. It was the sound of women who had learned how to grieve quietly, because kindness had come from the unlikeliest place, and they still didn't know what to do with it. Hamilton stood and raised a mug of lukewarm tea. "To mercy," she said. They raised their cups, and for a long time, no one said a word. If this story moved you, don't let it be forgotten. Like this story so others can witness what dignity in captivity looks like. Share it with someone who believes kindness has no place in war. Comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in their place? And if you believe history still has lessons to teach, subscribe for more true accounts that reveal not just what happened, but what mattered. Because history doesn't always march with rifles. Sometimes it weeps into soap. Sometimes it waits in silence long after the gates have opened.